Welcome to Echo Productions. I'm Silas Willoughby, and today I'm taking you on a shoot with me and showing you how I prepare for, shoot, and edit interviews. Let's dive right into it, taking a look at the first thing you need to do when preparing for an interview. The first thing you need to do is to find the location within the location that you will be shooting the actual interview at. And by that I mean this. For this interview, I was shooting at a large church, so while the interview was taking place at the church, I needed to find the place within the church, or the church grounds, where I actually wanted to set up and shoot the actual interview. Now, this was really easy for me since the church that I was shooting at went on Amazon and bought these cheapo lighting and backdrop setups to use for their interviews. And so all I had to do was come one day and help them get it all set up in the spare room. Now, like everything filmmaking, an interview is trying to tell a story. So find a place that has something to do with that story and use it as your background. This can be the person's office, their desk, or really anything like that. Once you have decided on your location, you can figure out the lighting you need to set up. Since mine was all indoors, I went with a simple 3-point lighting setup, using 2 of the church's really dim, junky softboxes as my key and fill lights, and used a small battery-powered LED I brought along with me from home as a rim light on the subjects to make them look more separate from the background instead of just fading off and feeling kind of like they were part of the background. Now, since these lights were pretty dim, I had to turn the ISO on my camera up to about 800. But the G7 handles high ISOs really well, so that wasn't really a problem. In fact, if you watched the video I uploaded last week, most of it was shot between 1600 and 3200 ISO, and it still looked fine. Once you have your lights set up at the location that you or your client chose, you need to set up your camera. A common mistake a lot of amateurs make when shooting interviews is to place the interviewer too close to the camera, so that the interviewee looks at the camera too much. This is especially difficult if you are interviewing children. Another problem is having the whole conversation happen just completely off to the side of the camera, like this. You want the camera to feel like it's part of that scene and that conversation. So I like to place my talent on one side of the frame, framing them with the rule of thirds, and then putting the person conducting the interview on the other side so that they're looking across the frame. This creates looking space, a simple framing technique that makes it feel a lot more natural to the audience. While we're on the topic of camera, there are 3 obvious things that you see messed up way too much in amateur interviews. One is not having the camera steady. You almost always want your camera steady for interviews, either on a monopod or a tripod. The second mistake is messing with the camera during an interview. While an interview is talking, the last thing you want to do is make them redo it. So don't mess with the framing while they are talking. It ruins the shot. And finally, don't place the camera too close to the subject. This makes the audience feel awkward. They feel way too close to the subject's face, so they probably won't keep watching. And lastly, before we move on to editing, is sound. The best way to capture audio for interviews is to have a shotgun mic on a boom pole as close to your talent as possible, or to use lavalier mics. But generally, shotgun mics have better quality audio, so I wouldn't really recommend using a lav mic unless you have a budget of at least $300 to spend on lav mics. Now, I didn't have the time to set up either of these on this shoot. I only had about 10 minutes with each person who I was interviewing, so I definitely didn't have time to mic them up, and I didn't have time in my initial setup to set up a boom pole. But since I was so close to the subject, I just put a shotgun mic on top of my camera and went from there. Not ideal, but it worked. Now, speaking of sound, you will save yourself a ton of time when you are editing the interview if you can avoid as many of those awkward ums as possible. So, you will want to take a few minutes at the beginning of the interview to get the subject more relaxed. So ask them some questions about something exciting going on in their lives, or random questions like what's their favorite color of ice cream, or their favorite flavor of ice cream, or just their favorite color. Anything really that might make them laugh and feel a little bit more comfortable with you and being on camera.
The one I'm getting?
Yeah.
It's going to be a Hyundai Elantra,
Hyundai
2002, yeah.
Are you going to leave it stock? Are you going to do anything to it?
I'll probably eventually later down the road maybe get new tires, but I'm not sure. I'll probably just remain the way it is, but
okay.
Yeah.
Another thing you need to try to do while conducting the interview is to talk as little as possible. Let them speak, don't interrupt them or prod them for more information. I found that you get the best results when they think you still want them to say more and they continue since you didn't say anything, you didn't ask for more of a different subject, or you didn't stop them. And then you don't have your voice cutting them off to deal with later. Now, on to editing. So, the first thing I do when I'm editing an interview is to go through and delete all the sections where I am asking the questions, and the sections where they make long pauses that need to be cut, and also the sections where they mess up. Yeah, I just said sections a lot, but... Now, when I delete these, I leave the gaps for now so that I still have the same sequential order in which I ask the questions. So the timeline looks a little bit messed up like this. Doing this makes it easier for me to put in the questions and figure out how I want the interview to flow later on. Now, the hardest part of editing an interview, at least in my opinion, is figuring out how you want the audience to know what question it is that the interviewees are answering. I usually like to do this with text. I'll do this by creating a new plane, adding a gradient to make it slightly more interesting, and then add in the text on that. But if you're doing something like a documentary, you will probably already led up to this point and you won't need to do anything to introduce the question. It should already be there. Okay, so now I have the interview fully cut together, with questions in place, and as you can see, since I shot in the picture profile Cine D, I need to add some contrast and darken the shadows so you can't see the wrinkles in the backdrop. I did this with a layer of curves, and finally I added a simple color grade using LUTs. And there you have it, the finished interview. If you want to check out any of the finished interviews, I'll put the links in the description. But that's all for today. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to learn more about filmmaking every week.